各位观众，大家好，我是于文琪。今天我们请到了前任美国国防部长 Dr. Mark Esper 来跟我们分享他的新书《A Sacred Oath》。他在2017到2019年担任陆军部长，之后被川普任命为国防部长，从2019年一直到总统大选2020年11月，他的书揭露了许多川普的想法及行为，在美国引起讨论。Secretary Esper, welcome to TVBS.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
First off, you talked about Taiwan as a sovereign country and the need to review the One China policy during an interview with Kyodo News last week. And during President Biden's visit to Tokyo earlier last week, he also said the US will intervene militarily if China invades Taiwan. Is the US policy towards Taiwan changing, or has it already changed despite the White House denial?
Well, I think it is changing, and I think it should change. I'm a little perplexed why the White House continues to walk back President Biden's comments on this. He's now said it 3 times that the United States would assist Taiwan militarily. Now, he didn't define what that means, and that's important. But look, as I write in my book, so much has changed since recognition of countries was changed in the 1970s and the Taiwan Relations Act in 1979. Both China, the mainland, and Taiwan have evolved in very different ways. And now Taiwan is a very robust democracy. You've had multiple transitions, peaceful transitions of power. You can stand alone on the world stage. So I think it's time, as I write in the book, to review the One China policy, to at least educate the American people on it, and then to look at strategic ambiguity. And I think it's time to move away from strategic ambiguity.
Yeah, as you said, China has evolved over the last 20, 30 years. So let's drill down on China. What was the Pentagon's view of the China threat, militarily, technologically, and economically? Because you wrote in your book that you wanted the department to actually focus on China.
Well, as you likely know, every year the Pentagon puts out a report on Chinese military capabilities, and the last one during my tenure also pointed out that China is a growing military threat to us in terms of everything from its strategic weapon systems to its conventional systems. And as we noted, I think in the 2020 report, that they had the world's largest Navy at that point in time. Maybe not the most capable, but the largest certainly. So I think when you step back, though, you have to look at China not just in terms of military capability and capacity, but also technologically, economically, diplomatically, all those things that really make a difference and add up to give you a country's national power. And in this case, look, China is rising, and that's fine. I don't necessarily have an issue with China's rise. What I have an issue with, as did the Trump administration writ large, I think, is that China is doing so in a way that undermines international rules, the international order, the expectations, and is increasingly bullying its neighbors in any way, shape, or form. Taiwan is a case in point. If you look at the number of intrusions by aircraft on a daily basis into Taiwanese airspace, it goes beyond what the understandings were in the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 communiques, the 6 assurances, et cetera. We always have called for a peaceful settlement of the Taiwan question, if you will. And what China has been doing in recent years, flexing its military muscle, its economic muscle, and its diplomatic muscle, is not in either the spirit or the written letter of those understandings.
I think one of the things that came out of the administration, the Trump administration, was its China policy that actually united Washington, D.C. in a bipartisan way. So why was there such a policy pivot? Was it driven by President Trump? If it was a different president, do you think the policy would have had a similar pivot? I was particularly intrigued by what you said in the book that Trump actually did not come around on China until his very last year, when China was kind of an easy blame target for his mismanagement of the COVID pandemic.
You know, I've been watching U.S.-China relations since the mid-1990s, and I've seen it evolve over time. I always took a more hawkish view toward China, if you will. I saw the business community starting to change itself in the 2010s or so when I worked on the business side of things. I think by the time President Trump came into office, it had reached a culminating point, if you will. Plus, he brought into the administration a lot of folks who saw China differently in the same way I did. So myself and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and others in the government. So I think the country had reached a point where we finally developed a consensus. And I think this is an achievement of the Trump administration to achieve this consensus within the government with both Republicans and Democrats, and increasingly across many sectors of our economy, that China is certainly a strategic competitor and, in my view, a strategic adversary that we needed to deal with in a more comprehensive and strategic way. And again, I give the administration credit for that. I think there's a whole lot more we need to do now, and that includes bringing on board our European partners and allies in that pursuit.
Yeah, you also mentioned, China's sort of rising naval power. Let's talk about Top Gun. Have you seen it, first of all?
The last time I saw it was 1986, so I have not seen the new one yet.
Okay, I would encourage you to see that. Certainly would make you proud. It is such a popular movie in Taiwan as well. It projects American power, hard and soft, shows American military might through the Navy and the elite Top Gun program. And you alluded in your book the need to actually invest in the Navy, in particular, building more ships like aircraft carriers, because China is catching up. Does the US still have the maritime superiority? And what needs to be done to retain that dominance in the Pacific so the US is actually prepared for a potential conflict with China, whether it's over South China Sea or Taiwan?
Well, first and foremost, the United States Navy remains the world's preeminent naval power. There's no doubt in my mind. China may have more ships, but what you have to look at is the quality and capability of the ships. And my view was that in order to perform the traditional functions of the U.S. Navy in the future going forward, such as control of the seas, maritime dominance, freedom of navigation, things like that, things that are important, by the way, in the South China Sea within the 9-dash line, et cetera. We need to have a bigger, more capable Navy, more smaller ships, more capable ships, more manned and unmanned ships, all those things, in order to make sure that we could control the seas, if you will, and keep freedom of navigation open, all those things that are important to international commerce going well into the 21st century. So China threatens that, as we all know. So I think that investment is important, and I'll have to get out and see the movie. But the fact that we're talking about a movie shows you that American cultural influence is important too. And we have to think about how we leverage those things as well. I've been fortunate enough to travel the world, and everywhere I go, look, people aspire to the freedoms and liberties that we have, that I want to believe the people of Taiwan have, that anybody who lives in a democracy enjoys and values. And that's why I think that we are now in this big struggle. At DoD, we call it great power competition between the democracies of the world and the autocracies of the world. And the autocracies are principally run out of Beijing and Moscow. And that's what the challenge of this century is going to be about, is who wins, and who wins that in the hearts and minds of people around the world, which is why, what's happening in Ukraine right now is so important, but also what may or may not happen across the Taiwan Strait is equally important. And that is the criticality of defending democracies around the world and freedom-loving people.
If the 21st century is the competition of great powers, are you worried about a conflict between US and China? You actually wrote about asking to postpone a larger than usual military exercise in the Northeast Asia right before the presidential election because you were alarmed by how this may be perceived by Beijing just days before the election. So you personally, as well as through General Milley, communicated with China that the US is not seeking any type of confrontation. Are the communications clear between the two sides?
Well, first of all, I consider myself a Reagan Republican, a Ronald Reagan Republican, which means I believe in peace through strength. And what that means is building a very capable military. But again, just to expand the conversation, a very capable economy, a very capable diplomatic corps, all those things that are important. Am I concerned about a war with China? In the sense that we do not need an unnecessary war with a country of 1.4 billion people, the world's second largest economy, so forth and so on. It would just do so much damage to the world, to relations between so many countries. Wars are ugly. You know, I served in the 1990-91 Gulf War. I know what it looks like. So you don't want unnecessary wars, and you want to avoid wars, which was why I did so much outreach to my counterpart in China. I met with him on a few occasions. We would have calls every quarter. I think it's important to do that so that you avoid misunderstandings, miscommunications, that you try and build rapport so you could avoid conflict. So I think we should do everything we can to avoid conflict, but at the same time, be ready for it, be prepared for it, so that if the Chinese choose the wrong decision, and again, this is in Beijing's hands, if they choose the wrong path, we're prepared to confront them with regard to that.
Now, you said if Beijing chooses the wrong hand, and Beijing may interpret it as the US making the wrong move. You know, we see just the decades of arms sales. The US has been selling arms to Taiwan since 1979 as required by the Taiwan Relations Act. Is that enough to deter China, given what's happening in Ukraine, as you said? What do you think needs to be done to sufficiently deter China, but not being misinterpreted? And what is China thinking regarding Taiwan, watching how the West responds to the Ukraine-Russia war?
Well, with regard to your first question about preventing misunderstandings, that's why I think that moving away from strategic ambiguity is important. I think the Chinese need to know that the United States and other democracies, certainly of the region, and I would hope the world, would assist Taiwan if there was some unprovoked aggression against the island and its 23 million people. So I think that's important clarity, and that they should understand that any type of the future status of Taiwan or whatever, again, should be addressed peacefully between both Taipei and Beijing. So that's my view on that front. That's where it makes the point for moving away from strategic ambiguity. With regard to Russia and Ukraine, I think it's extremely important. I've been saying from day one back in February that not only was the United States and our European partners watching, but I also knew that folks in Taipei and Beijing were watching as well. I think Beijing certainly trying to understand Russia's mistakes, its strategic failures in terms of its underestimation of European and NATO response, but also its tactical mistakes on the ground in Ukraine, its inability to seize Kyiv, its massive losses. I think those are all important lessons, but here's the more important lesson or lessons, and that should be learned by Taiwan. Look, the challenge is, unlike Ukraine, there's not a land border with mainland, but that also means there's not a land border from which the people of Taiwan can escape and move across the border into Poland or Romania or wherever else if attacked. So I think if a conflict happens, it would take days, if you will, for friendly forces to assist. I think so much of the defense of Taiwan, and therefore the deterrence of Chinese aggression, will depend on Taiwan beefing up its own defenses to include its territorial forces. I think, as I've said, I think lengthening conscription should be relooked. I think the types of weapons Taiwan buys should be relooked, and we should support that. I think the type of training, all those things, tactics need to be relooked so that Taiwan becomes a much more difficult place for China to seize, to even consider seizing, to make it look very tough. So I've been saying, if Vladimir Putin was given the chance to do over Ukraine, would he even go in the first place? And I think the answer would be no, given the strategic failures and everything else that's happened. And we want China to answer that same question in the same way as a no, because Taiwan appears so capable and so difficult for China to swallow in the first place.
Yeah, getting Taiwan ready to defend itself, but not being viewed as provoking China. That's a hard balance to strike. It was fascinating to read your book because you're not only responsible for the US military and defense matters, you also had to manage a president that was unusual in his governing style and comprehension of global affairs. So you did not have a typical defense secretary job, I would say. What were some of the hardest decisions you've had to make, both in terms of policy and politics?
I think the most challenging thing was not just dealing with a different president. And look, they're all unique. You have to figure out how to work with the person you work for.
But I think President Trump was truly different.
Yeah, definitely an outsider as well. So he came in, with a different set of understandings. But yeah, look, I talk about this. I think the biggest challenge was not just trying to manage an unpredictable White House, understanding the core guiding principles of the commander-in-chief and things like that. But we had to do that at a time when we were wrestling with, ongoing conflict in Afghanistan, possible war with Iran. I dealt with a pandemic, new dynamic into any administration in any country. So, look, it was a tough time. I'm very proud of both the civilians and the uniformed leaders at DOD. We stuck to our oath. We did what we thought was best for the country, and the country had a free and fair election that determined that President Joe Biden would be the next commander in chief. So I'm very proud of my department and what we did, and I again hope that we can continue the focus. I hope this administration will continue to focus on China and making sure that we prepare for that longstanding threat to us going forward.
Yeah, I have to say, your book was a really good read, given it's not a long tenure, but a lot has happened. And thank you for your service. 非常感谢大家今天收看与部长的谈话，让我们更加了解美国在印太地区如何对应中国的挑战。With that, thank you so much, Secretary Esper, for speaking with us today. Your book is still not available in Chinese in Taiwan, but if you would like, TVBS is ready to help bring the book to Taiwanese readers. So thank you and take care.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well,